presentation. And that's because I didn't think of the title to my presentation until this morning. So I want to tell you that it's called The 10 Things About Family Law a Lawyer Needs to Know to Survive Street Law. Is that in the packet?
I don't know if
Nope.
it's in the packet.
Okay, there's no. That's what you're trying to say. I have papers for you. They're coming. It's going to happen. Okay. It's a 10-part presentation. Let me quickly review the 10 parts. Cardio, flexibility, double tap, don't be a hero. Actually, that's the wrong presentation. That's how to survive a zombie apocalypse. I'll give that at a different time, that presentation. But some of the things do apply to the same scenario here.
What if you're divorcing a zombie?
It could happen. It could happen. Okay. Just to tell you what my presentation's really like, it's a bit like a brontosaurus. It has a very small beginning, a big middle section, and then a quick little ending. So it's like that shape. What is the first rule of thermonuclear dynamics? Anyone?
Over time, things tend to...
All right. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It is merely transferred or converted from one object to another. Right? Right?
Right.
Okay. That's what emotions are like. And while I can see the presentations thus far are pretty technical, my presentation is not going to be that technical. It's about surviving street law with family law questions. And the first thing you have to do is recognize the emotions, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But to stay calm, you must exude serenity. You must not make any sudden movements. You must keep a state of calmness around you. You do not want to absorb the emotions that are coming, radiating off this person, like you are being hit by a nuclear bomb. There's a reason we don't like family law. There's a reason. It's because of the emotions. Okay? Again, I'm going to get to that in a second. But the first rule is to stay calm. Recognize that there's emotions that are about to be transferred here. You are not going to receive them. You are not going to follow the first rule of thermonuclear dynamics. You have a shield around you that cannot be penetrated by what is coming at you.
Is that called the Ronald Reagan approach?
I don't know. I just think that, you know, we went to law school. I mean, I'm assuming everyone here is an attorney, but we went to law school and we understand elements, foundation, evidence, the rule of perpetuities, Shelley's rule, the 7 ways you can destroy a contract. You know, we know these things, but I don't remember one class about counseling. I don't remember one class about therapy. I don't remember one class about emotions and handling client emotions, opposing counsel emotions, which are often worse than the client. The court's emotions, that can be horrible. None of that was taught to us. And yet, that is the root of the issue that you're dealing with in about 20 minutes when a person comes to see you. So I'm going to give you some help with that. The most important job that we do is to counsel our clients. And if we can effectively do that, we've helped them. And that's really the most important job you can do in a street law setting, is to counsel them and to help them with that. Again, you need to stay calm. You need to work very hard not to have an emotional reaction to what you're hearing. I'm going to describe to you a nightmare I had, and this is very real, and I remember it very clearly, but it also led to an epiphany. The nightmare that I had when I was in the middle of my family law career, my past existence, my past life, I was in the filthiest bathroom you can imagine, and in my job, I was cleaning it. I was supposed to clean this bathroom, and it was like full of piss and shit and vomit, and it was gross, and it was like, I was just miserable. And then all of a sudden, Commissioner Marty Gross comes running in. And she said, "What are you doing?" You know, some of you can imagine the face. Tense. And your client's kid is out at the bottom of the swimming pool. You need to do something. And I was like, oh, you know, and I run out there, and there's a swimming pool, and there's a kid in the bottom, and then I wake up, and I'm just like, ugh. And I thought, here's the epiphany. I realized I'd really I had not only absorbed some of the emotional stuff that was going on in my cases, I felt it was my job to clean it up, and it's not. I'd also felt that it was my responsibility for what happened to these children, and it's not. You have to trust parents to be parents. You need people who have problems to take responsibility for their problems. Not that this would happen in street law, but one of my favorite questions to ask someone during a consultation is at the end of a long description of all the things that went wrong in the relationship. So what are you responsible for? And sometimes the answer is nothing. You know, but if you carefully analyze that with them, they have to take some responsibility for what led them to this spot in time. And it takes two. So anyway, that dream made it really clear to me that my job is not to clean up after people. My job is not to save their children. And I needed to create that clarity. Otherwise, I was just having nightmares all the time. Okay, so the second step, second rule to survive a street law encounter with a family law case is you need to identify the problem. When someone comes in and they say they have a family law problem, it can honestly be anything and almost everything. And so you need to spend a moment to figure out what is the actual problem that's being asked. I have to talk for just a second about grandmas. We love those grandmas. They bring in their sons, their daughters, their grandchildren, their nephews. The family law people here are starting to nod. They know what I'm talking about. And I sometimes like to do a little diagram of not only are you figuring out what the problem is, but you're figuring out who's having the problem. Because I firmly believe that the person who is having the problem is responsible for fixing it. And grandma may not be happy with the fact that her son is not getting the visits that she enjoys, you know, but who is responsible for this problem? Or child comes home from visiting with a parent and complains about the new girlfriend or the new boyfriend. Who's having the true problem here? So identifying the problem is a big piece of this, but also being very specific about who's having the problem. Many times when people come to see you for a family law issue, they're worried about someone else's problem. And it's constant. So you just need to spend some time to identify that, and that, you know, stay calm, identify the problem, identify who's having the problem, and you're almost 90% of the way there. This next part, which is the most difficult part, will almost get you through any street law consultation with a family law case. But it's rule number 3. Identify the emotion. When people are trying to transfer their emotion to you, one of the ways to make it so it doesn't really get internalized is someone comes in front of you and maybe they're angry, and next thing you know you're feeling angry. Someone's in front of you and maybe they're yelling, and next thing you know you're yelling. That happens to me. The biggest thing is to figure out what is that emotion and nail it down. Because if you can put that emotion on the table to be looked at and dissected, 1, it doesn't transfer, but 2, it dissolves and goes away. We are horrible at this as attorneys. They did not teach us this. Matter of fact, that's why we like the law. It's because we don't want to be therapists. We don't want to be psychologists. We didn't do that. Maybe some of you, one of you did, maybe, I don't know. But we like rationality, we like logic, we like rules, procedures, we like objectivity. But emotions are really what drive every issue in every case. And I've seen that, in the whole spectrum of legal practice. But in particular, every family law case is driven by emotions. And you have to figure out what that emotion is. And what you find out rather quickly is we're not very good at identifying emotions. We can sort of say, oh, you seem angry, or you seem upset. But it's not the right one. So I want to give you a little hint about how to identify an emotion. And I want you to practice with it. You practice with your family, your children, your co-workers, your clients. Opposing counsel is very helpful. And you get better at it. Your ability to understand what people are feeling becomes, you have a greater depth of language to describe emotions the more you practice it. So, what I want to say is in this first meeting, someone has come up to you and they have said to you, here's this problem I'm having. And it's active listening. When you identify an emotion, you're actively listening to the person. So you're saying to them, I'm hearing what you're saying to me. Matter of fact, I'm hearing what you're saying to me when you're not even talking to me. I'm hearing what you're saying to me by your body language, by your posture. It tells this person you're watching them and you're engaged in what is happening. So it's creating trust with them as well. But what happens, and this is the advice I want to give you, when they're talking to you, you say, it seems to me that you're upset. And someone who you haven't identified the right emotion, they'll go, yeah, I am upset. They agree a little bit, And you're like, well, seems to me you're frustrated. They're like, yeah, that's true a little bit. But what's happening when I'm naming the emotion that I think I'm seeing, they're not really, I haven't hit it. They're not really agreeing with me. They're just nodding. But something incredible happens when you nail that emotion. When you say, it seems to me that you're tired. It seems to me that you're embarrassed by this situation. It's like a light switch goes on, and all of a sudden, literally, it is night and day when that person looks at you and they think you get them, and you do, because you have nailed that emotion that sometimes they can't even say what it is themselves. But it is incredible. If you're able, they've told you their family law problem, you figured out what the problem is, you figure out who's having the problem, but then you figure out the emotional basis of that problem. You really can't screw up from there. Any advice you give, if you don't know the answer to the question, you don't know where to send them, you have no idea what the forms are you're looking at or where to start, it doesn't matter, because you have connected with them, you have helped them with this struggle that they're having internally that brought them to this spot. And I just have to tell you, that's the key to surviving street law. If there's any advice I'm giving to you here at all, is to help recognize the emotion that drove the person to sit here and to work past that.
Are there any books or materials that you found that are better at parsing it out a little bit more?
When I went to the mediation training and the collaborative law training that I've gone through, we practice a lot, and they actually give diagrams and lists of emotions. And I remember thinking, well, this is sort of silly, especially the play acting part of it. But it worked, and it works phenomenally, especially when you're at home and it's Christmas time and you start to see a fight developing between your aunt and your uncle, and they've had a few drinks. You're like, and then you just sort of nail it. Seems like you're having an emotional reaction to blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, and then it's just diffused. So it works everywhere. But it particularly works in family law cases at street law. So, and don't be afraid. of the tears that might follow, because that's just a normal human reaction to stress and to emotional reaction. And not all tears are bad, not all tears are wrong. It's a way that we process our feelings physically. I think some of the family law attorneys know the answer to this one. They failed on the thermonuclear dynamic question, but I think you can get this one. What is the number one emotional process that people are going through in a family law case?
Loss?
Mourning.
That's right, grief and loss. You say that going through a divorce, going through a separation or breakup, the only thing similar to it is a death. So you need to recognize that that is the predominant process that a person is going through when they're coming to see you. There are the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, acceptance, bargaining, negotiation. They change from day to day. You wake up and you're angry, then you start denying, then you go back to anger, back to acceptance, then back to anger. Anger is a very popular emotion when you're grieving. And it's okay, but you just need to recognize that those are probably the ones you're going to be dealing with. The anger, the grief, the depression, the denial. And you can recognize the grief.
Would there be any sources you could direct clients to go through that? I mean, Kubler-Ross perhaps, or?
You know, I think that they're there to talk. And one of the things about the way that our culture and society really works now is we text and email. We cannot pick up on the emotional reaction that a person is having. We can't see those signs. We don't know if we've identified their emotional reaction. So just getting used to doing that and being able to do that, it makes all the difference in the world. I mean, and I'll tell you, people say to me, they'll say, God, I feel so much better after having talked to you. I haven't helped them. I didn't do anything. Most of the time I tell people I can't do anything. But it's because we had a moment where we addressed an emotional experience that they're going through. That they either can go on and keep having an emotional experience, or they, most of the time they'll say to me, God, I just feel better. And if they don't feel better because I told them something that was helpful, they feel better because they recognize what brought them to this moment. So work at it. That is something they don't teach you in law school. They should have. I wish they had. But it took a long time for me to figure out that I was emotionally retarded and that I needed to work on it. And it improved my practice, and it improved my ability to communicate with clients, improved my ability to communicate with other attorneys, and also it stopped some of those dreams, you know, where I was absorbing people's emotional stuff. Okay, so that's the first 3 rules. Okay, now rule number 4. Just remember. You might say, well, I'm not a family law attorney, I can't do this. But just remember, you went to law school, you took an evidence class, you took a civil procedure class, you had to, everyone did. Those rules remain the same. It's still civil procedure. It's still evidence, yes, it's a little loosey-goosey every now and then. I mean, I think they call it the plagiarism calendar at court, but it's like, it's still evidence. So
that's perjury.
Right, sorry, perjury calendar, you're right. So anyway, you want to make sure that when you're giving advice to someone, just recall you file a motion the same way in a civil case as you do in a family law case. You've got a note for motion docket, a motion, a declaration, proposed orders. You schedule it, you have a hearing. It's the same. There's nothing magical or different about it. It was touched on just briefly by Mary, but I want to hit on it again. The number one question that came up when I was working at the DV self-help clinic, and it came up in my office too, is the jurisdictional issues. And in typical civil cases, we know about, we basically think about, is there jurisdiction here? You know, did an accident happen here? Where does the defendant live? We also think about the long arm statute, you know, is there contacts with our state? Can we get jurisdiction under the long arm statute? In family law, there's multiple layers of jurisdictional issues. We have the UCCJA, which is the Uniform Child Custody Jurisdictional Act. And this was developed so that parents would not run from state to state with their kids and file different orders in different states. They wouldn't run around and create that type of chaos. So there are particular questions about children in jurisdiction. Also, as you saw in Mary's presentation, there are particular questions about child support modifications, filing child support orders. The jurisdiction there is the UIFSA Jurisdictional Act. And so, again, there are particular rules for jurisdiction. If a person comes to see you in street law and they have what appears to be a jurisdictional question, it is worthwhile for them just to call an attorney. A lot of family law attorneys can figure out the jurisdictional issue pretty quickly because they know they just can't help this person because they're in the wrong state. If a person comes to see you, and this happens at least once whenever I do street law, and they have an order from another state, most states retain their jurisdiction when it comes to children. So you need to just be cognizant of that and know that jurisdiction will stay with the state if they've issued a custody order or something like that. So a little bit of trickiness with the jurisdiction that you may not be used to if you just practice civil law. Okay, let me talk number 5. Oh, one last thing about evidence. In family law cases, and I think this gets forgotten, but evidence is really important to a case. If you think a person makes a certain amount of money, you need to show a paycheck. If you have been receiving harassing phone calls, it's good to show your phone, record. How many calls have come in, texts, they're proof of messages that were sent, as well as emails. A lot of things can actually be proved in other ways other than just a straight declaration, and it can be just as powerful to help that person get that information properly before the court. So I just want to say, don't forget your rules of evidence, don't forget that it's still civil procedure, and you can still help someone if they come to see you. Okay, number 5 is parenting plans. And what I ask, Edward, if you can hand these out for me, you look like you need some exercise here. Now, if you want to take these, I printed out these parenting plans, brought them with me. If you want to take the parenting plans with you, fine. If you don't, I'm sure Law Advocates has a use for them. So you can leave them as well. I'm not going to go over the parenting plan page by page. I just want to hit on what I think most people fixate on when they come to see you at street law and the issues that they want to talk about with a parenting plan. The parenting plan I'm handing out, I printed off this morning from the state website. It's a washingtoncourts.gov. They have all the forms, they have all the instructions. It's a very useful place to go to get any form you want. Many people who see me at street law, they're holding a parenting plan in their hand. They've just printed it off and they brought it in to talk about it, along with some other papers. You may not be able to recognize all the other forms that they have, but if you can recognize the parenting plan and in the small amount of time you have, try to work with them with this document, again, that goes a long ways to helping them. Many of the issues that someone is going to be discussing with you, the problem that's identified is the parenting plan. The emotional issue is certainly there. So the parenting plan can speak to that. Please keep in mind, although it says on the title on the first page, parenting plan, it's about when, not how. It's about the time and the days. It is not about how you parent. It's about when you parent. Have to be really clear about that. Keep in mind also, our court is only good at two things. They only really do two things really well. They make people pay money, and they put people in jail. That's it. They're really good at that. Doesn't mean you actually get the money, but they don't make orders for people to pay money. They're not so good at regulating relationships. And, you know, if you think that's going to happen in court, I need to, you know, really disabuse you of that notion, because the fact is that the court system, many judges, many commissioners will say that if people leave the courtroom equally unhappy, they've done their job in a family law case. They don't want to appear biased, they don't want to appear preferential. They rarely, if ever, I've never actually heard it, maybe Mr. Peach has, or Ms. Marshall, or Mr. Woolley, but I haven't heard it, where a court says, oh, I'm so glad you left him. You were so right. He's crap. They don't say that. They also don't say, oh, you did such a good job leaving. She was a whore. Good job. They don't do that. It's a no-fault state. They don't care why you broke up. They don't care what brought you to this moment, which is, again, part of the problem. They're not recognizing the emotional basis that brought you in here in the first place. So people are very frustrated because their feelings are not being addressed, and they won't be, ever. So that's the disconnect with taking these issues to court. Family law cases are an ongoing train wreck. They happen every day. It's a disaster. I used to hate my phone and my email Monday mornings. I charge extra if you called me over the weekend for anything, because there was always something. And
How do you give them your phone number? On your
because I
phone?
charge extra on the weekends. And I care. Okay, so the parenting plan, just a pet peeve, make sure the number's on it. They usually have something that has their case number. It's no good to help them with the parenting plan if you just don't put the number on the front, because then it just, they file it and it goes off into nowhere. So the first thing you can do that's very effective when you see someone is make sure all their papers have the right number on them. Especially if they've been served documents, make sure that they are putting the right number down. When people look at these parenting plans, especially pro se people, their first instinct is, how many boxes can I check? I need to check as many as possible. And I think one of the instructions with it says, check as many as apply. So they have an urge to check every box, or as many as possible. And that's not really necessary or the case. Yes, there'll be circumstances where more than one box in a section applies, but there are times where it just doesn't, it's not applicable, and you don't have to fit into every category. As you can see, the parenting plan, the way it's designed, it's a proposed, as well as a temporary, as well as a final plan. It's the same document for all different types of settings. When you first are going to court, you would file a proposed. When you go into court to get your temporary order signed by judge, you would have a temporary one. You check a different box on this first page, and then when your case is finished, there's a final one that's entered. So it's the same plan. Okay, I want to go to page 2. This page just about kills parents, for people who come in for street law. They really want to check all the boxes in these first 2 sections. They want to add extra boxes, you know. This is when identifying the problem, identifying the emotion really comes into play. These restrictive, page 2 is about the restrictions. And restrictions can certainly restrict the other parent's time with the child. They are governed by statutes. There are definitions for what is abuse, what is neglect. It is not too much sugar. It is not letting your child have exposure to the internet. It is not playing on a Game Boy all night long or a PlayStation or something. It's not those things. You really have to make sure when you're listening to someone that you're able to distinguish what I always just call parenting conduct from actual restrictive bad parenting, which is this is the legal definition of what the court is looking at when they're thinking about abuse and neglect. Letting your child see an R-rated movie is not going to do it. There might be bad parenting out there, and that's the other thing I just want to touch base just for a moment on. I don't even call it bad parenting. What I've decided over the years is to call it parenting philosophies. Everybody has a different parenting philosophy, and sometimes the saddest case you ever see is when two people have gotten married, they love each other, they really have a great relationship, and then they have a child, and then they discover that they have completely opposite parenting philosophies, and they just cannot tolerate, they cannot abide by how the other person is parenting. It literally is too stressful, too anxiety provoking. It causes problems, and sadly they separate or they divorce when that child's going to grow up and move on, and then they're going to be alone, and they were with someone that they cared about. So I have seen that, but there really are distinct, what I call them, parenting philosophies. So there's not bad parenting, it's just parenting philosophies. And everyone has a different, it's all over the place. And I would love to tell you that one of them is right. I've thought about it. There is no rhyme or reason to me. Children grow up, some become doctors, some go to prison. I just cannot figure out, if like this sort of rigid personality, parent, or the one you hear now is the authoritarian parent, as opposed to the negotiating, mediating, collaborating parent. I don't know. So try not to judge people's parenting philosophies. You're going to see a lot. You're going to shake your head. I've said to people, your children are going to grow up and hate you, right? Like, you're clear on this. Because I'm telling you right now, this plan sucks. Like, I don't know why people divide up Thanksgiving. Who wants to eat 2 meals? It's dumb. So anyway, this section, show a little restraint, and if someone is talking to you about a violation here, they need to have evidence of it. So if there's domestic violence in a relationship or exposure to domestic violence, have there been arrests? Are there no contact orders? What is the evidence to support these allegations? It can't just be, just because two people are mean to each other and rude, and everyone says the definition of a relationship is an abusive relationship, but it's like, just because they yell at each other doesn't mean they're a bad parent. Just because a person is a profound disappointment to you doesn't mean that they're going to be a disappointment to their child. In some instances, in a dissolution or breakup, those parents just bloom and become outstanding parents. And I've seen it enough to see it to know it's true and to know it happens. It's just, sometimes there's control issues and things that come up. Quick, what's the overriding rule of a parenting plan? What is the court's rule, the template?
Best interest of the
That's right. It's the best interest of the child. Whenever you're talking to someone in a family law setting, a street law, refocus them on that rule, because that is all the court cares about. They are upset by what's happening. They miss their child on a birthday or a holiday or a weekend. They are suffering because they do not get to attend as many functions as they were used to attending.